I'm Kazzrie Hekati. I'm on the board of the Portland Psychedelic Society, and today we're excited to have Dr. Angela Carter, who is the vice chair of the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board. They're here to do about a 15-20 minute presentation about where the board is at in their process. Oops, and I'm going to let them do their own introduction. After that, we'll answer the questions that have come in through the chat. And then after that, we're actually going to do, because they're really looking for input from the community. So we'll do like a input piece will be the third phase. So I'll hand it off to you, Angela.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be here and to see all of you and to get your input and your feedback. I see some folks here who I've seen at some of the board meetings. Hello, it's good to see you. I'm glad that you're here as well. I'll start off, I guess, with an introduction of myself a little bit. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a naturopathic doctor, primary care mostly. I have worked for the last 10 years primarily in the queer and trans community doing primary care, public health work. And I also have worked for about 10 years as a medic at Burning Man in the field clinics. And in that capacity, I have sat with a lot of folks who have experienced psychedelic journeys. I started working with Burning Man Emergency Services before Zendo was a part of our community, largely. And so, you know, Zendo has taken a lot of that content on from the medics, but you still work with folks come through and they're experiencing what they're experiencing. So I say that I have sat with people in a harm reduction capacity. I help them get through the experience as best as possible. It's not a facilitated session. I am not pre-planning with them. I am not integrating with them, but I have sat with a lot of folks. I also volunteer as a supervisor with Fireside Project, which is a psychedelic support line. And we started, I think we began about 2 months ago now. It's 6-2 Fireside. If you're interested, it's available. We're expanding at this point to, I believe we're at 4 days a week. We're expanding to 5. It's a free service. I also work with a lot of organizations volunteering. I work with OHSU for the Transgender Health Program. I'm the Community Advisory Board Chair. All that said, really, I'm a pretty down-to-earth person, and I really care about this medicine. I really care a great deal about making sure that it's accessible to everyone who wants to have the service, both financially and culturally and situationally. I really want this to be something that people thrive on in Oregon. And to that end, today, although I do have some details about the board and what we've been doing, my main goal here is to collect your comments, your thoughts, your input, because you are the community for which we are building this program. I really want to build the program based on what the community wants and needs. It helps us take into account the things that we're missing. We have an amazing board of people with incredible knowledge and incredible experience. And some of us have experience working with psychedelics. Some of us do not. I really want to bring the voice of the community that has a history with this creature, this fungus. I want to bring that knowledge to the board as much as possible. I will give a caveat. I am the vice chair of the board, but I do not speak for the board. I speak as my own self. My opinions shared are my own. I will share knowledge of what we have been doing that is available in the public record. I will share what we've been talking about. I can't share details about what we're planning to do because we don't have any concrete rules yet. Once we have rules, I can share that knowledge, but before we do, I can't make any concrete statements about how things are going to be. So I'll do the best I can to answer questions about where we're going and give you the best framing I can, but I can't give the concrete final answer yet. Let's see. Of note, there may be a cat screaming in my hallway because they want to be let in. Please pardon the background noise. So I'll just launch in at this point and start talking about the board a little bit. At this point, we've completed our 3rd month of board work, and the 4th meeting was Wednesday. We have been working primarily with Nick Riley and Andre Orso as our administrative facilitators. The board, not the board, but the OHA just hired Angie Albee as the services section manager. So she'll be working with us over the next several years to build this program out. And then also they've hired a new policy analyst, but the OHA is still working on finalizing the budget and getting it approved to hire further assistance. So we'll have a slow trickle in of more administrative support over the summer. So those are our admin team. We have at this point formed 5 subcommittees for the board. We have the equity subcommittee, licensing, products, research, and training. And I'll go through and give you a little bit of a briefing on each of those subcommittees and what we've been up to. I am in 4 of the 5 subcommittees, so I have a little bit of a paucity of knowledge on the licensing subcommittee, and I apologize for that. I read over their notes and tried to give some information, but I haven't been able to attend the meetings, so I'm not as knowledgeable. I can't go quite as in depth. I'll start with the equity subcommittee. It is chaired by Dr. Rachel Knox and myself. We've had 4 meetings so far since starting up at the end of March. We have 17 subcommittee members that have been selected from community who have knowledge in and experience with psilocybin, and also history working with the cannabis community. We have folks from MAPS, we have folks from a bunch of small grassroots organizations. We have a ton of folks, and I'm really personally very excited about the group of people that we've brought on. So at this point, we've been talking with our subcommittee members, getting oriented to each other, the group, and we've been creating space for discussion of Measure 109, the text of the law, and trying to get input on the text of the law itself and each of the subcommittees and what work is being done. So the equity committee, the framework is sort of to have roots in all of the committees because we want to come from a place of starting with equity on this board. And moving forward, we will be having subcommittee members in each of the other subcommittees to listen in, to advise, and to bring back information to the equity subcommittee. We, at this last meeting, provided commentary from the group that was put together to each of the subcommittees, and they are all working on integrating the advice. We are intending to have guest speakers with experience in the industry and experience with cannabis law to come talk to us about how to include an equity process that is central in this process. And we will also be working on gathering public comment from the communities, especially communities that have been the most marginalized by the drug war. So that's sort of a general picture of equity. I want to pause just in case there are questions that I could answer here, or should I wait until the end?
I would say let's wait till the end.
Okay, let's keep going then. So as I said,
Well,
licensing.
And actually,
Oh,
let me insert that one of the questions that came in was asking if MAPS was a good place to go to ask about equity.
MAPS has an equity and inclusion group that they have brought together to advise them. I believe that they could definitely be a source of good information for centering equity. I think there are a lot of different organizations that we need to call on and bring in to advise us on equity in general for many different communities. I think it's going to be community variant. Some communities are going to have different needs than others, and we need to hear from everybody who's been impacted, and we need to hear from everybody who has a stake in this.
Well, thanks for, I wanted to ask that one question because it was on that specific topic, and I'll let you go ahead and continue your.
Okay.
Going through this.
So next is the licensing subcommittee. Dr. Mason Marks is the chair. I believe there have been 3 meetings so far. And the discussion is centering at this point around equity and licensure, licensure of service centers and the requirements that will be in place for that, consumer protections, standards, requirements, and licensure for facilitators. They've begun talking about licensure for manufacturing and grow operations. A lot of that discussion has been relegated to the products subcommittee, just by the nature of the information. And then an informed consent has been a big piece of the discussion in the licensing. And that's my best summary for that committee. Unfortunately, I wish I had more information, but come to the committees anytime. Actually, that is something I want to put in the chat a couple of times. I'm putting a link in the chat that is the link to the OHA website. This is where all of the meetings are recorded and all of the minutes. Oopsie, I moved to a different screen. All of the meetings and notes and any documents from the meetings will be included there. So please visit that site, see what we do, come see the actual meetings. You can be there in real time if you want to. It's wonderful to have community participation. There's often room for community input at the end of our discussions. Subcommittees are meeting weekly, some bi-monthly, some of them. And we have a speaker series actually that is ongoing over the next several months with some really incredible people in the field. I encourage you, I'll share some of our lineup of speakers. I think that we are confirmed for the majority of them, and let you know who's going to be talking so you can make some decisions. Next up is the products subcommittee. There have been 4 meetings so far, and the conversation has been focused on what products we will have available. Do we want fresh? Do we want dried? Do we want encapsulated? Is it going to be extracted? Is it going to be manufactured using E. coli bacteria or yeast? There's a lot of different possibilities for manufacturing. And there's also a lot of possibilities for final products. So that's been a big piece. We've talked about cultivation practices, whether or not, say, Wood or dung will be allowed as a substrate for mushrooms. We've talked about lab synthesis procedures, methods of psilocybin quantification in the actual final product, and other agents as well. There are many different agents, many different compounds in psilocybin mushrooms. There's, baeocystin and phenylethylamine and aeruginosin. There's a ton of compounds, and that synergy, that collective work is different than taking a pill with just pure psilocybin in it. There's an entourage effect, and we've been talking about the different products that we might use to allow as much room as possible for all of the different experiences that people want to have. We've also discussed species identification strategies and which species will be allowed to be cultivated, and then how to standardize product so that people know what quantities of psilocybin they are receiving. At this point, we've had 2 guest speakers, and we will continue to have guest speakers. 2 weeks ago, we had Paul Stamets, and then today, just at the meeting earlier today, Dr. Felix Bly came to talk to us. And then as far as future speakers go, I can tell you that let's see, I'm looking at a list, pardon. We have on the 8th for products, Daniel Ballhorn and Kyle Myers. On the 22nd, we have James Keim. On the 5th of August, we have Keith Williams. And on the 19th of August, we have Benjamin Malcolm coming to speak. I can give a little more detail if folks would like to know more about these people. I'll leave that to the questions, but you can also feel free to look them up. Their information is widely available on the internet. They're each specializing in a variety of different aspects of fungal identification, psychopharmacology, and a variety of other things. So that's it for products. And then we have 2 more. We have research and training. The research subcommittee has been very active in the last 3 months because we had a deadline of June 30th to complete the production of a document cataloging and summarizing all of the scientific knowledge that we could find on the use of psilocybin to treat mental health concerns. So that was the framework for the document. And at this point, the document is largely finished and will make the June 30th deadline for submission. What happens after that is the OHA will have it peer reviewed. So we will have a group of specialists in the field of psilocybin review all of the data, double check our citations, make sure that we are telling the truth and providing a clear understanding of the data that's available. At that point, once it is peer reviewed, it goes for, I believe it goes for a period of public comment, and then it is published by the OHA on the website that I dropped in the chat earlier, and will be part of public knowledge. And then the goal is to use that information to build out the laws, the policies around, the licensure process, the education process, the growing process, the manufacture and transport process. All of these different pieces will come together somewhat based on what we learned. So I have a list of folks who are nominated for peer review, but we don't have a final list of folks who for sure will do it. And I'll just go through the list. Professor Matthew Johnson from Johns Hopkins, Professor Michael Bogenschutz from New York University, Professor Robin Carthart Harris from Imperial College London, Professor Peter Hendricks from the University of Alabama, Dr. Shana Kustin from OSSU, Dr. Felix Bly of Project Miraculous, Dr. Janice Frick from Hofmeister Lab, and Dr. Bia Labate from Chacruna. So those are the folks who have been nominated, and we have received some information from about their interest. But I think we will be solidifying that at the next research committee meeting, which is next week. Finally, we have the training subcommittee. That is Tom Eckert and I are co-chairs. We've had 9 meetings so far, and the focus has been largely around what will need to be contained in a training program for facilitators in order to certify and license them. The discussion of when the training programs will be initiated is still in process, but there is a goal to have some rules built by mid-July. What we've talked about is informed consent processes, screening processes, what integration is and what that looks like, who is going to be able to provide facilitation and integration services. And we've talked about having potentially one licensure for facilitators, but potentially more than one, maybe one for people who are directly entering the field and one for people who are licensed in a field of mental health. So that idea is still up in the air. We're still discussing it. At this point, we've moved to collecting information from experts so that we can have a good package of information to inform the structure of the training programs and how we're going to lay down the laws for that. As far as speakers go, we have had Francois Borzat and Sarah Gale from Zendo, Pilar Hernandez-Wolf and Claudia Fuentes. And then I believe we have Alan Davis coming next week. We still need to confirm a few more speakers before I share any more, but that's how we've had so far. So that's a ton of information that I just dumped on you. And I will give you all a minute to sort of process all of that. But I would love to take some questions at this point about what's going on.
We
I
can,
assume we have some from the chat.
yeah, there are some in the chat that I think I had asked John to do that, but I actually grabbed him as we were going.
Okay.
If we want to just, let's see. Brandon asked the question, would the equity access to treatment be to treatment or to providers and supply, or for providers and suppliers?
Yes, that is a very good question. Its goal is for everyone, people who are entering the field, people who are going to be facilitators, people who are going to have grow operations, and people who are going to be recipients of psilocybin. The goal is to create an equity system in all of these areas. We want people to be able to afford the services. We want people to be able to afford the training programs and the licensure. We want the trainings to be culturally competent and really go into depth on working with healing all different kinds of traumas across communities. We want people to have access to, potentially to grant money, so that they can start a facility, so that they can start an operation. So all of these things are being discussed. Again, we don't have any concrete final plans, but there have been a lot of wonderful comments and suggestions from the group about how to create that equity.
And the related question, sort of, Cami asks, what's being done to ensure that big corporate money doesn't come in and take over the opportunities for providers and suppliers. And I might add to that question, if you can address the two, my understanding is you have to have lived here for 2 years to apply for, I believe, either a supplier or a facilitator license, right?
That is correct. You have to live in state for 2 years before applying. And there's a limit on the number of facilities that can be owned by one person or one entity, one business entity. So I believe you're not permitted to have more than, I need to pull up the language of the law to be sure. I believe it's 5 facilities for facilitation of psilocybin experiences. And is it 2 or 3 as far as grow facilities? I'm not sure on that one, but the law does limit the number of facilities. So you can't come in and have a monopoly of facilities in Oregon and take over the entire business, basically. Yeah, I think is that a good enough?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Sasha asks, could the training committee be encouraged to supply written notes or transcripts? She notes that other committees do, and it's much easier to skim a written set of notes than to listen to an entire meeting recording. And it's also an equity issue for those with hearing impairments.
That is so true, and that is
And
my fault.
I'd
I
like
have
to-
a
I'd like
book.
to add to that question.
Yeah.
And that is, I know that I get sporadic notifications from the OHA, excuse me, about subcommittee meetings, some, but not all of them. And the other question is, are those subcommittee meetings recorded and placed anywhere that we can, I totally get Sasha's question about transcripts. They're much easier to go through, but it's also true that some people want to see actually what went on. So are they recorded? So sort of a 3-part question for you.
Yes. So first part, yes, the meeting minutes will be typed and put on the website very soon. I have been behind. I have the notes written. I need to transcribe them to text, and then they'll go up on the website as soon as possible. So my sincere apologies for not having that up and not having that information more accessible. The other part of the question being the recordings, that is also that all of our recorded sessions, all subcommittees are all on that website that I will post again, just to make sure everybody has it. You can go to that website, you can find the meeting minutes, you can find the recording of the meeting, and you can find some supplementary information from each of the meetings. There will be, this is the website that a lot of information is going to be on once we finalize the paper. It'll be available here for public comment and for sharing. Does that answer all of your question, John?
One more question, Angela, and that is the announcements of meetings of the subcommittees tend to
The announcements.
be sporadic and often only a day or so, sometimes the very day that the meeting occurs. And I'm wondering if something can be done about the board to get those notifications out in a more comprehensive manner.
The goal is definitely to do that. I think that might be an artifact of the hiring process not being quite ready to, not being ready to hire someone who would be doing this work right now. Nick Riley who is also working elsewhere and has taken this on secondarily, is doing a lot of the administrative work to invite people and arrange meetings and host. And it's just been a lot for one person to manage while also doing a second job. I believe that as someone is hired, that will become much more streamlined.
Thank you.
And there's a question from Lynn if practitioners in Southwest Washington will be able to provide services, which I think is a pretty obvious no. It's an Oregon program, correct?
We don't have any say on what happens in Washington, correct? Maybe
And then,
they'll expand at some point. Who
yeah,
knows?
and then related to that, Afia, who is a naturopath, asks why only live there 2 years. What if I've had my ND license in Oregon for 2 years doing telemedicine? Question mark.
It's a good consideration. I don't have an answer, but I know that the residency clause is pretty firm. You have to be an Oregon resident. You have to have an address in Oregon. I mean, we have a short session coming up this season, and then the next legislative season is long. So that's when modifications can be made to the laws that are in place. It is something you could do to take that on and petition for that law to be changed if that is something that you would like to pursue.
Thanks for answering that. John, do we have more questions? Do we want to go to, I know there's some folks with their hands up. I'm always a little nervous to do that, to unmute the audience. What do you think, Angela?
I'm okay with it. If I'm here for it. I'd love to have discussion.
There were a few questions about training, and they come up in PPS meetings all the time. Who's going to be allowed? What length of training is it going to be? How much is it going to cost? That kind of thing.
Yeah, all good questions, and I may not have a very complete answer to provide. The goal is to have therapists, to have facilitators, excuse me, trained and ready to go, so that when January 2nd, 2023 rolls around, we have trained facilitators ready to start facilitating with people with mushrooms that have been grown prior to the time when the launch is. So that's sort of the goal, is to have that process. But where we are in the length of time, there have been a number of different possibilities thrown out there. Someone suggested 10 months, someone suggested 6 months, someone suggested a year. So I think there's a lot of variation and possibility. We've talked about some potential different systems of doing like how we would frame the training. And I feel like I'm missing a part of the question. Length of time, cost. So again, we want to make sure that this is equitable. We want to make sure that there is some way for scholarships to happen, some way for people to have access to money to start up grow operations. We're not clear on how that will be yet. We're not sure if that's going to be a state funded thing or an independent nonprofit. There's a lot of questions still there. At this point, we're in the discussion of what needs to even be in the program before we make a decision on the length of time that program is going to be. We have to have a sense of what's in it. So that's unfortunately the best answer I can give you right now, but more to come.
Awesome. A couple more questions, and then maybe we'll go to these folks waiting patiently with their hands up. Erica asks, will people from other states be allowed to access the healthcare option in Oregon?
If you are not a resident of Oregon, can you utilize psilocybin? I think that's the question here. And there's nothing in the law that I have read, the way that I interpret it, there's nothing saying that folks who live elsewhere cannot, which means that people will probably come to the state to access these services, to access this care, which will bring a lot of tourism, which will bring you know, a lot of potential benefit in a lot of different ways, and potential harms as well. So we're trying to keep an eye on all of those different pieces.
And I guess I would insert the comment that because she specifically asks about it with the healthcare option, there is, you know, there's a lot of this is about depression and anxiety and PTSD and treatments, but there is
Right.
also the allowance for spiritual experience. There can
Hmm.
be, you know, because I've seen Tom Eckert, the chief petitioner, talk a lot, and you know his vision of, you know, spiritual retreats that have this as an option. So it wouldn't necessarily, it's not specifically, there is no, unlike like with the initial medical marijuana, there was qualifying condition. You had to have a qualifying condition to get a medical marijuana card. This has no, none of that.
Correct. Yes. No requirement for a letter from a physician saying you have depression, anxiety, etc. It's just, I would like to access these services for mental health, for spiritual purposes, for personal growth. It will be available to anyone who is over a certain age. I believe the age is 21.
I think it is, yeah. And so one last question, and then I will call on Connor. Um, Peter Addy asks, have any guest speakers been or will be from nonprofit organizations like Compass and ATAI? ATAI?
It, I'm trying to remember if we talked about anyone from Compass coming. I believe there's a possibility that we might, but I cannot say for sure. I'm not sure. And so we we are working on minimizing conflict of interest as much as possible. We are looking at, you know, a group of people who work with mostly universities. We're trying to minimize the potential conflict of interest from people working with private companies, but that's a lot of where the knowledge is. So we are including speakers. We have had speakers. Dr. Bly today has a company that is a private company and also does a lot of research, and that was really valuable and useful. The information was really useful. Paul Stamets has fungi perfecti and a number of patents and a number of other things, very much invested in this field, and also conflicts of interest are there. What we're doing with that, trying to be transparent, making statements of these are the conflicts of interest, these are the different organizations that I work with, so that people can know what background they have and how it's advising the information that they're sharing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that answer. And I think I'm going to call on Connor, and I'm going to let everybody in general know, maybe we can shift, because we probably could have endless questions, but shift from questions to what Angela is really asking for, which is input and suggestions. But I'm going to see, I think now you can unmute yourself, Connor.
Hi, Angela. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. I really appreciate it. Don't worry, my question is just a simple one. I've been to the OHA website before, and I've seen the available web links for the recorded sessions and so on, but I was unaware of the fact that there's a public speaker series. I'm wondering if the past sessions with, because there's a lot of great names in there that I recognize, I wonder if those have been recorded and if they are anywhere, and equally where we can find the link for the upcoming speaker series, because again, I can't seem to find it on that OHA page.
All of the speakers are speaking in public meetings. So you can come to the meeting. Product subcommittee meeting, for instance, had Dr. Bly today. So you can come to the meeting, listen in on the conversation. It is recorded as a public record on the website under the subcommittee. We haven't put forth a list of the speakers on the website. It is a good suggestion, and I will put that forth to the OHA and see if that's something that they could add so that there's context and people can find who they're looking for.
I would appreciate that. So again, the actual speaker series is on that webpage as well, because I think I just seen the committees and so on, but not like this speaker.
All of the subcommittee meetings are where the speakers are happening.
Okay.
So all of the meetings are recorded and the speakers are in those meetings.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. I guess we'll go to Noah next.
Hello. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, great. Excellent. Well, thank you for always being so accessible. One question I have, and one obsession I have, is affordability.
Mhm.
And in particular,
Oops,
Oh,
I'm so sorry. Oops. I hit a button. I apologize. I meant to mute somebody else. Sorry about that, Noah. Let's get you unmuted again.
okay, can you hear me now?
yes.
Great. And so the bill says the OHA gets to decide if there are group sessions. And I assumed that that was going to be not really up for debate because obviously indigenous cultures have used group sessions for eons. We're seeing that it can be even more valuable than one-on-one sessions for veterans and others, that it can have particular value in that space. And just also, I think people should have that as an option. But most importantly, it's the only way that I can see costs being remotely affordable, because having a one-on-one session that takes 8 to 10 hours and then all the additional things, it's in the thousands of dollars. But one of the things that I've noticed is that there's not universal support for that, particularly from the licensing subcommittee. And so one thing I was wondering is what your feeling is about that, how others feel, and if the equity subcommittee might make a strong endorsement for group sessions to push others on the board along, to say that this is an important part of equity and affordability, and this is really something that we need to do. Thanks.
Yeah, I personally really agree. Group sessions are, I think, crucial for affordability, for folks who would like to partake in a spiritual group setting, for, there's so many reasons why groups are going to be important. And I feel like when, taking the temperature of the board, again, this is my assessment, not what we're doing, but it seems as though everyone is very pro group. I think it's just a matter of how we do groups. And also the equity piece of, yes, groups are more affordable, but if someone has severe PTSD and maybe a history of assault and maybe some depression, that person deserves to have one-on-one if they want it. That person deserves to have a private session, and we need to figure out a way to make sure that people have access to private sessions at a reasonable cost as well. I think that's a really important part of what we're talking about. Again, we are not into the details yet, but I really want to make sure that that's accessible, whether it's by scholarships or a fund that all of facilitators put a certain percentage of their income into that goes back into the community, or there's a lot of ideas that the equity subcommittee has been throwing around about how we can make it affordable and accessible for folks. Like I personally, I'm very interested in psilocybin's potential use for helping people with substance use disharmony. And, substance use disharmony and poverty, they live together, they go hand in hand. And so we have to find ways for people to access this care who are dealing with addictions, who are dealing with severe emotional experiences that are making it impossible for them to work. I'm totally on the same page with you, and I will do everything I can to make sure that happens.
I mean, I do think there are some people on the licensing committee who are not on board based on some.
Licensing?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't been to any of the meetings, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But I hear you, and we'll have to have a conversation about that. We've been talking a lot about how we need to merge the groups so that we can have joint discussions about, the training subcommittee and the licensing subcommittee need to get together and discuss, you're licensing this process, but we're making the training program and deciding what's going to be in it. And so we need to have crosstalk. And I think there's been a lot of shifting and changing of thoughts and opinions over the last 3 months. I'm sure that there will be shifting of thoughts and opinions more over the next few months. It's been really good conversation. Again, I can't guarantee, but I'm really motivated to make sure that that happens. And we have precedent. It's happened for millennia. People have been sitting in groups for millennia. That data is out there. It has to be acknowledged. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We could go ahead and unmute. Looks like Chris has a question.
Yeah, I had written in the chat, but I figured I would elaborate in this shifted format we touched on. This kind of line of thinking initially started in looking over the original rules of not allowing outdoor cultivation. And then you mentioned a couple points about wood not being allowed as a substrate and banning certain species from cultivation or from the program. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate on, I guess, kind of that, where that's coming from.
Yeah.
I guess I envision the Pacific Northwest, like Portland and the Pacific Northwest. I mean, we are a psychedelic hub because of the native species that are here that grow on wood in their native habitat. So I'm wondering if that's in efforts of, I guess, maybe spreading stuff in the wild and it's this habitat or and affecting. I'm just wondering where these considerations are coming from.
Yeah, totally valid. Totally. Um, so specifically with the wood, there is a phenomenon that has not been recorded in medical literature, but it has been anecdotally reported frequently in some areas, and specifically with wood growing species of psilocybes. We don't know the reason behind it, but what occurs is wood lovers paralysis. That's what it's called. It is a temporary, transient loss of motor function in the body, in the arms and the legs. The face tend to be the most affected. And it comes on typically between 6 to 8 hours after ingestion and the effects last about 24 hours, sometimes a little longer. Now, because this hasn't been characterized in the scientific literature, it's difficult for us to advise on it, but there's enough knowledge and information out there that there's some caution on the substrate that's being used, because we know that the reports are all in wood growing fungus. So that was the thought for why to limit that particular substrate.
So would I mean, if you banned, say one of these wood loving species and a cultivation, or, I mean, I guess there's kind of two approaches. If you're looking at the substrate as being the problem, I mean, if you found a cultivation method on a different substrate that was not wood, yeah, I'm wondering if it's being pegged as the wood is the problem or the species is the problem, or we don't know, so we're going to ban both of those things.
I think we don't know. There's been a lot of different theories around what causes it. It could be something that's in the wood that the fungus is pulling out of the substrate and concentrating in the fruiting body. It could be bacteria. It could be a compound in the mushrooms that is more concentrated in wood growing species. There's a lot of possibility. So things have moved towards not allowing wood as a substrate and potentially not having wood growing species as potential for use.
And that would include maybe the 5 to 10 species that fall in that quote unquote wood lover category.
Right, yeah. Right. So
unfortunate.
Oh, I'm trying to remember some of the names, but yes, it's the ones that grow on wood, essentially. There's also been discussion of other substrates like dung. And there's a thought to move away from that as a substrate because of the potential contamination of bacteria, viruses, animal medications, pesticides, all sorts of stuff that can be in the dung and can be concentrated. We discussed a little bit about, well, what about sterilized? And there's still a chance of more bacterial growth on dung. So there's a movement to shift away from that as a possibility. Again, we're not confirmed on anything yet, but there's been a lot of discussion about not using those substrates.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So I got a lot of things, a lot of excited people on this call or on this Zoom. John has a couple questions. There's one in the chat I was going to read, and we've got 2 hands up, and I'm not quite sure which one to go with. I was sort of, if
Evie was first, and then Brandy came after that. So.
I see that. But I think I'm going to jump the line and ask Carolyn's question. Given the intersection of Measure 109 and the war on drugs, will formerly incarcerated or felon convicted growers / providers / healers have access to licensure if they want it? Thought that was a great question.
It is, and there is language in the document currently around felonies. People with drug conviction felonies, I'd have to pull it up. Oh, I want to make sure I tell you correctly. There's some language around people with prior drug convictions having access.
Because I think there was a time for it, like a certain number of years.
Right.
Previous, and it was, yeah, we'd have to look that up though, huh?
I'd have to pull it up, yeah. And I will not do it for the sake of time and brevity. I would love to give you that information. But also there has been discussion of, again, short legislative session coming up in 22, long session in 23. There has been some talk of modifying the law so that more people have access. With limitations, we want to make sure that it's a safe environment. So there may be some limitations around violent crimes or sex offenders, but there is definitely talk of opening the law up more so that people who have been impacted by incarceration have access to this field.
Well, and I think her question might have specifically been around drug crimes. If you're a grower that got in trouble years ago and now it's not even illegal, they hold that against you. But we do have to look that up. And thanks for not dragging us down a
research rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, we can go ahead and go to, is it Evie, or am I pronouncing that right?
You're unmuted, but we still can't hear you, Evie or Evie. Not working.
Is your microphone turned off?
Pop it in the chat and we'll get right back to it as soon as you, okay.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I had to unplug something. I had a quick comment about, it's Evie actually. I had a quick comment about banking services. So in the marijuana industry, to sell marijuana, you don't have access to banking service because marijuana is federally illegal.
Right.
So in the psilocybin industry, selling the product would probably be very similar. So if you're a product manufacturer and you're selling to somebody, I think it would probably be evaluated on the same terms by a bank. I guess it's unclear to me if, as a facilitator, you fall into those same laws. Are you aiding and abetting? I mean, I wouldn't expect you to know, but I think it'd be really valuable for facilitators and service locations potentially if they are not directly giving the product to the client to have access to banking services, getting loans for things and, being able to have a bank account and stuff like that. So if there was a way that the Psilocybin Advisory Board could do a little bit of research and to figure out if there was a possible way where they could work with legislation and things like that to get banking services, available to facilitators. I think that'd be a huge thing for the community, the professional community.
I agree totally. We need to make it accessible for people to get loans and be able to swipe credit cards and all of that stuff. And that we have to facilitate that process somehow. We have to make sure people can get insurance if they want it, to make sure that they're covered as a facility or an individual. And there's no insurance out there either right now. So we'll be definitely, my goal is to make connections with industry and say, hey, look, this is going to be happening. How can we work it out for everyone to benefit and not be restricted because of what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine as a product manufacturer, you still fall under that federal rule. So I don't think, products would ever be able, I mean, as long as we have these rules around where you can't aid and abet these federally illegal laws. But if there was a way that we could kind of, the law could kind of separate out, the product manufacturer is directly giving or somehow selling it to the client themselves, and then the facilitator and the service location are completely not involved in that. Or I don't know if it works legally, but it'd be huge.
I don't know either, but it is a really good idea to bypass the facilitators so that they don't have that impact. They are facilitating only. They are not providing. I don't know how it works out with the law exactly, if that has to go through the facilitators. It might not be concrete in the law. So
yeah, I only bring it up because banking services would be huge for.
Yes, I know it.
Thank you.
Be able to have it.
So my question sort of follows right on top of that, which is how are people going to source? Is it going to be through the facilitators, or do they have to bring them? Do the clients have to bring their own medicine to the sessions? And then I have another one on top of that, but touch on that one first, if you would.
Yeah. No, I think that it would be delivered directly to the facility, and the facilitator would be present with the person and the substance at all times. There's going to be probably pretty tight, especially in the beginning, regulations about handling and chain of
custody.
Thank you. Yes. There'll be a very strict chain of custody, basically to minimize diversion. So it would go from the manufacturer or from the grower to the manufacturer, from the manufacturer to potentially another place, but also could just go directly to the service center where the facilitator would be present with the person using the substance. Microdosing, we haven't really gotten to that conversation yet. The law says that you have to be in a facility to receive, and that the facilitator has to document when the journey is over. So there's some wiggle room there, whether or not you have to stay in the facility all day if you microdose, or if you need to stay there for a short period of time for observation or what have you. But it would all happen at the service center.
And my second question is, and a lot of people within PPS would agree with me, and many would argue not, but will facilitators be required to have navigated the journey space with psilocybin? If they have not personally, my belief is if they don't know the space, they can't really sit or facilitate for anyone. I'll just leave it at that.
My personal opinion on that is that we absolutely should have that opportunity for facilitators. I agree. You can't explain it to someone. You can't imagine it. You have to have that lived experience to really be able to understand how to navigate in it.
Exactly.
It's like giving someone a map and telling them to try and find their way through, a totally uncharted forest. It requires some knowledge and of the experience personally, I think. And I think it has to be included. Didactic and also experiential training. There's been a lot of talk about that on the training committee, and I think some folks are interested in that being possible, and some folks have some hesitations. But I think it's really necessary. I do. It's hard to hold somebody's hand across that kind of a veil if you haven't been there before. Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. Thank you.
Oh, and actually, I think a related question there is related to consumption of psilocybin on a smaller level for the facilitator themselves. Now, granted, if you're working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday with clients all the time, you're probably not going to join them. But like in a spiritual setting where, is it ever going to be appropriate for, or does is it in the rules about whether the facilitator would be allowed or disallowed to consume the product themselves during a session with a client?
There is clear message there that facilitators are not to consume psilocybin with the participants. So that's a clear boundary that's been put in the law. So if you are in a spiritual setting, for instance, and you want to take a sacrament with everybody else, that would technically be against the law as it stands now.
Well, thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
I think maybe we'll go to Brandy. We'll get you unmuted.
Hi, I just have a comment around limiting corporations from being able to take over the market, like they're currently doing with the marijuana market. So you had mentioned that you were going to, or looking at limiting ownership or the amount of facilities or grow operations that can be limited. So my question is, or not question, or more of a comment, I guess, is that, obviously corporations are crafty and they'll find ways to break in and make money when they can. So are we also, or I hope we're also looking at things like subsidiaries, shell companies, having a parent company that maybe now they've got 50 different companies, but they're actually all traced back to an original single owner, so that they don't sneak in the back door and take over anyways.
Right. Yeah. It's a really good point. And I don't know that the law as it's currently written has that wiggle room or not. I'd have to look at the document and give it a little more analysis to see. I think it says individuals, or I will not speak something that I don't know for sure. But there's room to add to that language to prevent monopolies, I think. We haven't talked about it in depth yet, but it is a very important point, I think, of conversation. Oregon is all about, cottage industries and, small businesses. And I really personally prefer the idea of it staying that way as much as possible.
And I think that's what the language around the limitation of 5 service centers per person or per entity or per business, so that you could have 5 big ones, I guess, but that's, I think, going to be hopefully not something that gets changed, which maybe address that when you referenced at one point, changing the law. Is that, I know that's what happened with cannabis is, we passed something and then it can just get changed in all sorts of ways. Do you have concerns, or can you speak to that a little bit?
I'm not super familiar with the legislative process of changing laws. I will defer to someone else with more knowledge about that process. But I know that long sessions are when you are able to make those changes, and 2023 is the next long session. So at minimum, we have at least until launch and maybe the first 6 months before this would be addressed by the legislature. And as a board, the OHA would not do such things. The board or individual members on the board could do such things, and so could community members. You can petition. I don't know all of the details of the process, but you can work into petitioning to change the law. And there are a number of things that we are looking at as options for change at this point.
Well, thank you for that information. Nobody has their hand up, amazingly. And I'm sort of monitoring the chat. John, do we have unanswered questions, even though too, some of them sometimes are a little bit either redundant or elementary, but
one of the questions that came up was, are sessions going to be required to be at a specific facility, or can people do sessions in their homes or at a retreat center? Or, the possibilities are pretty broad, but or is it going to be required to rent space in a facility that's sanctified by the state? Wrong word, but you know what I'm saying.
So it's not possible to do it in homes unless they are specifically zoned for such things. So certain business areas, but I think, well, homes meaning houses. You could have a house where you do it, but I don't think that you can live in the same place as you do the work. I have to check on the law again to make sure of that. But it's going to be based on state, county, and local zoning laws where it's allowed. It's not allowed within a certain distance of a school. So there's a lot of specific regulations around that that I believe prohibit home use.
and John, you're muted.
There's a lot of stuff in the chat, but there's so much. I think maybe we should, people put your hands up, or shall we unmute the mics at this point? And
well, we definitely want to still call on people. So you need to, and we didn't explain to raise your hand if you don't happen to know, under reactions at the bottom of the screen. If you click that, raise hand is the bottom. It's not the clapping hand or the thumbs up and all the other ones that just appear and disappear. There's a raise hand, and then we'll see you. And we could let class go early. We don't have to go 90 minutes if we've actually answered everything. I'm hoping that I don't know if we want to talk to the community about this happening next month or 6 weeks from now, or at sort of regular intervals to do updates. Do you have a thought on when would be appropriate, Angela?
Well, we have monthly meetings. A lot is going to be happening in July because the research paper will be published, and the training subcommittee is trying to come up with some rules to put out there so that the facilities can get started getting programs certified and get students into the programs. So I think a month could potentially be good. We could also do a month and a half and see where we're at in mid-August. I'm open. I'm happy to come back if this is useful.
Well, I think it's definitely useful, and looks like Bridget raised her hand. So let's see if you'd like to answer your question.
Hi, yeah. So I'm wondering if there's a number of different psychedelic assisted psychotherapy training programs out there, and I'm wondering if having completed one of those programs would help you qualify to be licensed.
I'm sorry, I missed, you cut out for me the last part.
I'm just wondering if the existing psychedelic assisted psychotherapy programs that are out there are going to be considered as the equivalent of the training, or if, how that will integrate with the training program you guys are making.
There has been some talk of that. We have not determined who, but there has definitely been discussion of programs outside of the state of Oregon offering training to people in the state of Oregon, meaning you go to a program in California for a long weekend and do online didactic work from the state of Oregon. So we've talked about outside programs being an option that would be available. And which ones have a program that is sufficient to meet the Oregon model is not clear. You know, some of the programs, a lot of the programs require you have some sort of licensure before you complete the program. Like for instance, California Institute for Integral Studies requires that you be, you know, a therapist or an MD or clergy or something in order to do their MDMA program, their MDMA facilitation program. And so it's hard to say who's going to be allowed to complete that certification. There will probably be a lot of outside schools that apply for that and who modify their programs to fit the Oregon model. But I don't know who those are going to be yet. And I don't know. I know that we need a lot of schools because there will be a lot of people interested in the training, but not sure who yet and not sure the links or the other details. I wish I could tell you more.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a really good question because I know it seems like there's an explosion of all sorts of different programs you can take, and it's great to have training, and so go take them, but it's important for people to understand right now there's none that's going to check that box for sure. Maybe you'll get lucky. Oh, I did this and it happens to apply, but and I'm pretty sure nobody is misrepresenting and saying, come here because then Oregon's going to open up and you're all good. Like that would be incorrect if anybody's making that claim.
Right. I would say that you probably should not enroll in any programs until they've been certified. If that's your goal in Oregon to serve as a psilocybin facilitator, then wait until the program is certified because there's no guarantee otherwise.
My question for you now is, what would you like from us? You've been answering a lot of questions. Peter has some recommendations for the board, and we can go to Peter, but what else would you like from us? Since my understanding is you've come here specifically to get input from the community.
I know there's so much information out there. There's so many people who have cultivated incredibly specific strains and have knowledge of, you know, really good growing practices. I know there's people who've been facilitating in community for decades, and they have a really good sense of what is needed to make sure that people stay as happy and safe and have as useful an experience as possible. I'd love to hear from folks who are willing to, you know, obviously if you don't want to be on camera, that's totally fine. I'd love to hear from folks who have experience. I'd love to hear from folks who are going to be experiencing the psilocybin experience and what they're looking for in a facilitated session, what they want to make sure is there for them. So I'm open to any and all information. I just want to hear from community as much as possible about what you desire this program to look like.
And related to that, Brandy asks where they could submit that. Do you have an email we could put in the chat that you would like Angela recommendations and sent to?
I could start an email address just for that. Actually, I have one. Let me make sure that I know
that you get it correct.
That I get it correct.
Yeah.
I think it's AngelaCarterND@gmail.com, but let me
like to test that out for you. Well, or I guess you could more easily open it up and see if that's the correct one. Because too, the other thing we can, the meetup listing for this will continue, and so I can go in and edit and add that contact information later to the meetup, but it would be better to give it live right now for people if you have one.
Well, how about I'm pretty positive it's AngelaCarterND, all one word, @gmail.com.
That's N as in natural, Angela Carter.
N as in naturopathic, D as in doctor, yeah. ND. I'm trying to, I don't want to scramble around trying to find it. And I'm almost positive that is it. If it is not it, and I do not receive that email, I will open that email and make that email mine.
That works. Peter, do you want to unmute yourself and ask or put forward your suggestions for the board? It's a bit of a controversy in the chat room right now, but it's well worth talking about, I think. Are you there?
Peter
He
says,
he says he can't unmute, which,
Okay.
oh, he should be able to. Maybe I can find him and request that he do that. Unless he means because there's noise in his background or something.
Well, let me read what he's put in the chat then. Recommendation for the board, Compass Pathways has proven itself to be untrustworthy. I would recommend not talking with them or other Peter Thiel-backed corporations. Then he had a recommendation that it be required that facilitators need to have multiple psilocybin sessions as part of their training. And that brought up issues of ableism and issues of constitutionality.
yeah, I don't think that it should be required. I think that it's very important, but there are going to be people who have health issues that cannot. And I don't think that they should necessarily be excluded from doing facilitator work. Some programs, other programs do things like an experiential breath work session so that people can have an experience of an altered state, but in a way that is healthy for their body. Indeed, ableism is important to call out. And if somebody cannot, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't try to be a facilitator. I think it does really make a big difference in the care that someone's able to offer and the way that they're able to understand the session.
And certainly the transparency would come into play there of, you can say, I've been doing this for 40 years. I've had 10 trips. I've had 3 trips, or I wasn't able to, that would be just, I would think disclosed either disclosed by the facilitator, or you certainly as a client could ask, hey, what's your experience with this?
I would actually like to recommend that be part of a facilitator's requirements, that they let their clients know how many actual journeys they've taken and what context those were in. It's a whole different ballgame if you're talking about being a teenager and going to a rave or whatever, versus spending time with someone processing what's going on for them during a journey. So.
Yeah, I think we've really acknowledged recently the importance of the self-work that is, emphasizing that self-work with facilitators. It's an ongoing process. It's a lived experience of constant work on the self, to be aware of your container, to be aware of your background and how it impacts who you're sitting with, to be aware of your triggers. All of these different pieces are really important in a facilitator. And I think that, the psilocybin experience facilitates that introspection. But there are other ways to go about getting that self-gnosis.
Cool. Looks like Cami has her hand up again. If you'd like to unmute and ask a question.
Yeah, we've talked a bit about the facilitators, but in terms of suppliers and growers, is there going to be the same kind of limitations on, like you mentioned, the limitation of 5 facilities for someone who's facilitating? But what about for growers? What kind of equity protections are we talking about there?
There's also a limitation on the number of growing facilities that someone can have in state. And we have also been talking about how to facilitate the process of getting smaller businesses loans and grants and money to have growing businesses. It's all of the different aspects, whether it be manufacturer, facilitation, service center, all of the different aspects that are going to be licensed. We want to make equity accessible points as much as possible, so that people who are, for facilitators at least, so that people who are reflective of another person's lived experience can sit with someone, so that they can have that mirror, that someone who understands their identity, their background, their culture. And as far as growing goes, it's indoors. It's by the law, by the statute, it has to be indoors. And that means renting or buying a facility, a large facility to grow in. And that's costly. Then you have to consider the costs of testing, and you have to consider the costs of an HVAC system. And there's so many pieces, and it can add up. I believe it was Paul Stamets who said it was 500,000 to 600,000 to get a certification of good manufacturing practices for his lab. So it's a huge overhead. I don't know yet how to do it. I have to say, I'm not sure, but it's a big research piece that we've started at this point. Like, what are the other systems that are out there that have equity-based programs? How do we bring that into this as much as possible, so that small businesses can grow a small crop and have a cottage industry going, as well as the larger businesses, a balance. I'm not clear on how to do it yet. I welcome input. I would love to hear your thoughts if you have any.
Well, I was curious because, you talked about limiting the number of facilities of where they're growing, but without limiting the size of those facilities or the output of those facilities, I'm not sure that's a real limit. It's really just limited by the amount of capital they can put into building these. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I've got a small farm, and it's already hard enough. Like, I'm not a commodity farmer. I'm not somebody that's gonna be part of this huge agricultural system that's destroying our planet, frankly. So so yeah, so I do, it's something that that I do have a background in as well, through my own experience, and that I want to be able to provide, so, be able to actually do something and grow something that I really truly care about. But I just don't want to see that opportunity taken away by big business, like everything else,
Yeah, I do. I like the idea of collective style. Like, we have one producer, and that producer has a radius of these facilities that are close by, so that industry stays local and stays in the community. And this one grower grows for these facilities, and they have reciprocity between the organizations, and they work with each other to improve products and like have this network together. I really like the idea of doing that, like, one service center or one facility for growing per so many service centers. And it's just like, these are the folks that you've contracted with, so that it stays on the smaller side. I don't know what will happen, but I like that idea. So we'll see.
Well, thank you so much for all your questions. I want to acknowledge that it is 8:30 and some people want to go. Oops, and it looks like Carolyn just disappeared. I was gonna have her have one more question, but maybe she's gone now.
I'm here. I realized that we were out of time, and so.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, no, I think maybe one more question, and then too, there's always the option. It's not like exactly rolling, but if Angela's willing to stay, we can stay, or maybe an hour and a half is enough time, and we'll take one more question. So let's take your question, Carolyn, and then Angela can address whether we're done or not.
Yeah, thank you so much for the event. Thank you, Angie. You're just like out there, I see you just doing, I can't believe how much you're doing. It blows my mind. I want to get you a personal assistant.
I'd love it.
Like, you should not be worrying about transcriptions and things. So we can talk about that. This isn't like a comment. I think we've talked about this before, and I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but I think that we need to all be concerned about the impending crackdown that's going to happen on those who choose to remain in the underground. And so folks who have been working indigenous folks who've been doing their thing, that is their right, who may choose not to get permission from the state and come above ground, but who are charging a lot less, are going to be real competition potentially to some of the newly licensed folks. And so I hope that conversation is happening, and I don't know if it's a conversation with law enforcement about lowering priority for, I can hear the phone ringing at the police station right now of like therapists calling in to crack down on those who are not playing by the rules that some feel are not fair rules.
Right.
And so I don't know if there's conversation about that happening in those boardrooms, but I hope that will be taken into some sort of consideration. So thank you very much. That's my comment.
There is the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance, which is a group here in Portland that's working towards the deprioritization of larger amounts of plant and fungal substances for ceremonial and ritual use. So there is a movement happening to try and decriminalize, not make legal, but to make it the lowest priority of law enforcement to go after people with larger amounts of, say, psilocybin mushrooms or ayahuasca that might be for ritual or, traditional use. So there's things happening in tandem, people working all over the place to try and make this happen. And I'll say I'm very invested in, making sure that I think that government has a long history of various forms of injury to various different aspects of our community. And there's trust that needs to be built. And that trust is going to take time and effort on the part of the state and effort on the part of the OHA. We have to build relationships. Why would someone who's been underground for 20 years want to become a part of a state program? We have to provide benefit for that. We have to provide a reason for people to join, or why. So I think that there's got to be a lot of discussion around building those relationships and building something that has an incentive and has use. Maybe a nonprofit that gets everybody health insurance who's a facilitator would be of use. Something that gives people a reason to become a part of a state system, and a state system that is not so rigid that it blocks them from doing what they've been doing for 20, 30 years. So we'll see again where that goes. I'm hopeful that we can start building those relationships and the trust. But again, I don't expect that to happen overnight.
Well, I'm just really excited and proud to have you as one of our representatives on that board. I'm excited that they picked you. Other than Tom, I don't know anybody else on the board myself yet. I want to wrap up by reminding people that there's a link to the feedback survey, letting us know what you liked and what you didn't like about this event, if you could fill that out. We also love donations. We're a 501c3, and that's how we survive. There's a link to that in the chat. And you mentioned the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance. That representatives from that board and the Decriminalized Nature are going to be at a Sunday event this Sunday at 2:00, calling it a town hall to talk about all of the things related to what 110 did in decriminalizing small amounts of everything. So I think that's a good place to stop. And after everybody goes, we'll go ahead and have an after session debrief. But thank you, everybody. And if you want to unmute and say you love Angela on your way out, you can go ahead and do that now.
Thank you, Angela. You're the best.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela.
Love you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela. You're awesome.
Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're so
Namaste.
Thank you, Angela. Appreciate you.